The Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations will now come to order. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good morning, and welcome to today's hearing entitled Examining Biosecurity at the Intersection of AI and Biology. The goal of today's hearing is to examine a rapidly evolving threat landscape at the intersection of artificial intelligence and biotechnology. This convergence promises extraordinary breakthroughs for medicine, for public health, and scientific discovery. But it also introduces profound new risks to the safety and to the security of the American people. Our hearing today is about minimizing that risk of misuse and ultimately to protect national security, while also maintaining public support of AI's ability to assist with groundbreaking advances, such as finding life-saving cures for diseases like cancer. For decades, the United States has led the world in biotechnology. But what was once confined to specialized labs with highly trained scientists is now increasingly accessible far beyond traditional boundaries. Synthetic biology tools have become less expensive and much more widely available. For example, a basic CRISPR gene editing kit can be purchased online for under $300. Advanced AI systems like large language models, or LLMs, and biological design tools capable of generating, troubleshooting, and optimizing biological designs are moving faster than our existing oversight frameworks were ever built to anticipate. In recent years, studies have shown that cutting-edge AI models can walk users step by step through complex biological processes, including those relevant to developing or modifying dangerous pathogens. These tools can assist experts in breakthrough research, but they might also enable individuals with far less training to bypass barriers that once protected against accidental or intentional misuses. Some LLMs have even been shown to outperform PhD-level virologists on advanced troubleshooting tasks. There is also early evidence that AI systems can design entirely new biologic entities. A recent study demonstrates that an AI model generated multiple synthetic viruses, some of them with capabilities that researchers previously had thought were impossible to achieve. As a physician, I must acknowledge the extraordinary promise that AI-enabled biotechnology holds for patient care. AI is accelerating drug discovery, improving protein modeling, and enabling the development of therapies with unprecedented precision. But the same technological advancement can also raise the stakes for biosecurity. These risks are not theoretical. National security experts warn that adversarial nations like China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, and others might seek to exploit AI-enabled biologic design tools for malicious purposes. We, in Congress, must take these warnings seriously. AI-enabled biotechnology presents issues that our current frameworks might not adequately account for. Existing government oversight systems, such as the dual-use research of concern policy, might not apply when an AI-designed organism is not identified as a select agent, not known to infect humans, or not developed with federal funds. The Trump administration has taken steps to keep up with such advancements, but the federal government must continue to carefully assess whether our current safeguards and reporting systems are adequate in an era of rapidly advancing AI technology. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. Your expertise will help guide Congress as we confront these daunting challenges. With that, I now recognize our ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Clark, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to our panelists. It has been nearly a year since the Trump administration began its crusade on Americans' health care. In that time, President Trump and Secretary Kennedy have decimated America's preparedness tools for pandemics. Because of this administration's actions, we are less prepared for a pandemic threat than we have ever been, be it a natural pandemic virus or virus created by artificial intelligence. And they've done it all with the green light from congressional Republicans. This administration's lack of seriousness about public health threats was clear right from the beginning. In January, there was a meeting between the outgoing and incoming administrations to discuss the country's response to a pandemic emergency. And while several incoming Trump administration cabinet officials attended, Secretary Kennedy decided he could not be bothered and did not show up. The administration then illegally froze all federal grant funding, including grants for biomedical research, and has completely terminated hundreds of them. Since he was sworn in, Secretary Kennedy has gutted the HHS workforce, led an unprecedented campaign of lies about the safety of vaccines, and retaliated against individuals who dared to challenge his ideological agenda. This administration's failure to protect the American people from public health threats is already becoming evident. This year, 2 children and 1 adult, all unvaccinated, died of measles, a disease that was declared eliminated in the United States 25 years ago. Under Secretary Kennedy, HHS has not been able to contain the growing outbreak. Hundreds have been quarantined in South Carolina in an attempt to prevent the virus from spreading. Secretary Kennedy has continued to lie about the safety of measles vaccines, which have proven safe and effective for decades. And in 2 weeks, because of Republicans' failure to extend premium subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, millions of Americans are going to be priced out of access to health care, the first line of defense if they get sick in a pandemic emergency. Now, with 2 days left before Congress recesses for the holidays, Republicans are scrambling. On the floor, they are making a last-ditch effort and half-hearted effort to make it look like they're doing something about more than 20 million Americans losing access to affordable health care. But despite all the upheaval and chaos over the past year, the Republican majority has simply refused to ask the administration any tough questions or hold serious oversight hearings. Republicans have ignored Democrats' calls to have Secretary Kennedy testify on the measles outbreak and have allowed their colleagues in the administration to avoid Democrats' numerous legitimate congressional oversight into their actions. At the beginning of this Congress, Energy and Commerce Democrats introduced 23 amendments to the committee oversight plan in order to commit to actual oversight over Secretary Kennedy and HHS. Republicans said these amendments were unnecessary. They have given Secretary Kennedy the green light to carry out his ideological agenda undeterred. I understand the importance of examining biosecurity and AI and appreciate the witnesses with their testimony. But how can we address AI threats of tomorrow if Republican leadership refuses to address the public health crises of today? And how can we take seriously any bipartisan effort to talk about AI risks when the president has issued an executive order seeking to punish states that put up guardrails? History has shown that it is not a matter of if there will be another pandemic, but when. It does not matter if it is a natural virus or a virus created by AI. Every day that congressional Republicans enable President Trump and Secretary Kennedy's recklessness, we are less prepared for the next pandemic threat. It is an abdication of this committee's leadership and extremely dangerous for Americans across the country. And the health of the American people is going to continue to suffer until the dangerous, unqualified, and anti-science officials in this administration are held accountable. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Guthrie, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Joyce. Thank you for holding this hearing to examine biosecurity at the intersection of AI and biology. I am hopeful about the potential for medical breakthroughs because of advancements in AI and biological sciences. There are incredible benefits for innovative medicines and public health preparedness on the horizon. At the same time, scientists, AI company executives, and national security experts are expressing concerns about the increasing risk of misusing AI to develop dangerous biological weapons or novel pathogens. The pace of advancements in AI and biotechnology in recent years is staggering. The barriers that once constrained biological weapons development are lowered with widespread accessibility to gene editing and open source AI biological tools. While it is difficult to say how much time we have left to mitigate the risks of an intentional or unintentional AI-enabled biothreat, it is not too late to act. Today, we will explore the opportunities, risks, and adequacy of the current safeguards. As we have these discussions, it is important that any efforts to limit the risk of AI-enabled biotechnology do not limit American innovation in these fields. To win the race for AI, American AI innovators must lead the way in developing cutting-edge products while taking steps to acknowledge and mitigate biosecurity risks in their products. Some are already taking such steps. Additionally, the Trump administration has implemented important measures to prioritize AI innovation and biosecurity. For example, the Improving Safety and Security of Biological Research executive order from last May is intended to strengthen oversight and accountability of life sciences research while ensuring U.S. remains a global leader in biotechnology. In addition, the administration's AI action plan, as well as other executive actions, are preparing for the novel risk of AI-enabled biothreats. In particular, the recently announced Genesis mission aims to unleash AI and biotechnology innovation, including detecting and countering biological threats. I look forward to discussing this emerging issue and examining ways we continue improving America's biosecurity infrastructure to keep up with the evolving technological landscape. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to hearing your testimony, and I will yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I cannot play along with whatever alternate reality exists in this hearing room for the Republicans today. In this very room earlier this year, Democrats fought for over 24 hours to try to prevent Republicans from taking health insurance away from millions of Americans and driving more hospitals to close across the country. And across the street in the Capitol, Republicans are teeing up a vote on a so-called health care bill this afternoon that does nothing to make people healthier or make health insurance more affordable. In fact, their legislation does nothing to prevent health care costs from skyrocketing for 20 million Americans and about 4 million Americans losing their health care altogether. And over at the Department of Health and Human Services, a block away, Secretary Kennedy is making us less prepared for a pandemic by putting out misinformation about life-saving vaccines, and Americans will die as a result of Kennedy's dangerous, repeated misinformation. Now, today, this hearing is focused on biosecurity and pandemic threats and how AI might enable bad actors to develop bioweapons. I have very real concerns about these threats, but we can't ignore the immediate threat that the Trump administration and Secretary Kennedy have made us less safe and prepared across the board. And I simply have a hard time understanding why Republicans in the majority can hold an oversight hearing on hypothetical future threats from AI, but can't hold a hearing on current public health threats, such as the measles outbreak that's going on right now in at least 13 states. And across HHS, experts and scientists are being replaced by ideologues and quacks, frankly. Secretary Kennedy and his followers are personally demanding public health agencies abandon longstanding evidence-based recommendations on the safety of vaccines and demanding the HHS leadership to follow his anti-vaccine will. Now, we have an FDA that's being led by unqualified anti-vaxxers who are doing everything they can to scare people about the proven safety of vaccines and scaring off any drug manufacturer that we might rely on to develop treatments and new vaccines. And the CDC is increasingly led and advised by individuals lacking public health experience who reject settled science and embrace an ideology of reducing vaccine access, including for newborn babies. DOGE and Donald Trump's director of the National Institutes of Health froze or canceled thousands of grants, including funding for research on viruses, pandemic prevention, and vaccines. And this research is essential to finding the cures and treatments of the future to fight life-threatening diseases and viruses. And finally, while we're going to talk about the risks that AI might generate if used by a bad actor to create bioweapons, President Trump issued an executive order just last week that threatens to sue and withhold funds to states that have put in place crucial guardrails for AI. The president's action is not only illegal, but it will increase the risks from AI, including biosecurity risks, at a time when the use of AI is rapidly expanding. Now, unless committee Republicans join us in demanding even the most basic accountability from this administration, nothing will stop this president and Secretary Kennedy from doing whatever they want, regardless of what laws we pass. And under the Trump administration, our pandemic preparedness and public health systems have been decimated, and it's time for real oversight and accountability in this committee. This hearing is simply incomplete without testimony from Secretary Kennedy. We can't address this threat without hearing directly from the HHS Secretary. So pursuant to Clause 2K6 of House Rule 11, I move the Committee on Energy and Commerce issue a subpoena to HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. to testify before this committee. Mr. Chairman, that is my motion. Mr. Chairman, could I ask for a roll call on my motion?
Mr. Ranking Member, votes have been called. Can we address that when we reconvene? We're going to adjourn, and we will reconvene 5 minutes after the last vote has been cast.
When do you plan to call the vote, and can you assure us it doesn't conflict with
We will reconvene and address that issue at the completion of this morning's voting session. The committee will come to order. Prior to recessing for floor votes, the ranking member has made a motion. The committee will hold this motion in abeyance until approximately 30 minutes after floor debate begins on H.R. 6703. The chairman and the ranking member of the full committee made this agreement to postpone consideration of the ranking member's motion until that point. Thank you. We have concluded members' opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' written opening statements will be made part of the record. We want to thank the witnesses for being here today and for taking time out of your schedules to testify before the subcommittee. You will have the opportunity to give an opening statement followed by a round of questions from members. Our witnesses today are Dr. Jassi Pannu, Assistant Professor, Department of Environmental Health and Engineering from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and Senior Scholar, Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Dr. James Diggans, Vice President, Policy and Biosecurity, Twist Bioscience Corporation. Matthew McKnight, General Manager, Ginkgo Biosecurity, Ginkgo Bioworks. And Dr. Fiona Havers, former lead of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Respiratory Virus Hospitalization Surveillance Network team. We appreciate all of you being here, and I look forward to hearing from you. You are aware that the committee is holding an oversight hearing, and when doing so, has the practice of taking the testimony under oath. Do you have an objection to testifying under oath? Seeing no objections, we will proceed. The chair advises that you are entitled to be advised by counsel pursuant to House rules. Do you desire to be advised by counsel during your testimony today? Seeing none, please rise. Raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Seeing the witnesses answered in the affirmative, you are now sworn in under oath and subject to penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. With that, we will now recognize Dr. Pannu for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. Mike.
Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Clark, Chairman Guthrie, Ranking Member Pallone, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the chance to speak with you today. My name is Jassi Pannu, and I'm an assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. I'm also a board-certified internal medicine physician. I first want to commend you all for your attention to how we can improve our ability to prevent, detect, and respond to future biological events, including pandemics. Building our capacity to do this will protect the public by reducing the chance of these biological events, whether they were to come from a natural source, a lab accident, or the deliberate use of a biological weapon. AI has already been used to solve challenging biology research problems and is continuing to advance rapidly. It holds great promise in areas of biosecurity and biodefense. For example, AI could be used to improve pathogen surveillance and even provide early indicators of outbreaks, making it possible to contain them before they spread. It could be used to optimize medical countermeasure supply chains, both at the design stage for a countermeasure as well as manufacturing and distribution. These promising advances may not arise by default due to lack of incentives in the private market, and the government should consider these defense-forward applications of AI to strengthen our resilience to biological threats. But to fully realize the benefits of AI, we should also anticipate and navigate its potentially serious risks, such as those that could cause loss of life and societal disruption. Researchers who monitor these risks have noted a few key areas. Large language models and AI agents can provide bad actors with biology knowledge, including bioweapons-related knowledge. They can also help users write code and carry out tasks in the digital realm. This is referred to in the field as AI uplift. Frontier AI companies in the US are now working with the US Center for AI Standards and Innovation, previously the US AI Safety Institute under the prior administration, to test their models for these risks and to develop safeguards. Biological AI models, those models that are trained on biological data, such as sequence and structured data, pose a different set of challenges. These models are used by experts, such as life sciences researchers. A small subset of these models have capabilities that could be misused, such as the prediction and design of properties of pandemic pathogens. In general, skill barriers to the use of these AI systems are falling as tools become easier to use and integrated. These are among the important risks that Congress will need to address. I recommend Congress take 3 steps. First, Congress should empower Casey to define the narrow set of biological AI models that could pose societal-level harms if misused. Currently, the research community is attempting to define the scope of these models in an ad hoc fashion with limited government input, and an authoritative assessment of this would provide developers with much-needed clarity. Second, Congress should task OSTP to develop a considered biological data security framework. Recently, over 100 leading researchers endorsed a statement that a narrow subset of biological data, such as pandemic pathogen data, could be misused using AI and should not be available for anonymous access as it sometimes currently is. The National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology also called for similar security controls on sensitive biological data. Third, Congress should develop and pass legislation for universal gene synthesis screening that secures the digital to physical barrier in a way that supports this industry and U.S. competitiveness. In addition to these measures, the subcommittee has an important oversight role and should direct the NIH to ensure that AI-enabled research is appropriately addressed in its ongoing biosafety oversight modernization initiative. If taken now, these measures will help protect the public from future biological threats, engender trust in science, and enable society to fully harness the benefits of AI-enabled biological research. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We will now recognize Dr. Diggans for his 5 minutes to give an opening statement.
Morning, Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Clark, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. So my name is James Diggans. I lead policy, biosecurity, and trade compliance at Twist Bioscience. Twist is a synthetic DNA manufacturer. We're based in the United States. We have facilities outside San Francisco in California and outside Portland in Oregon. To understand what we do, imagine a bridge between the digital and physical worlds. Our customers send us text files that contain sequences of A's, G's, T's, and C's, representing the individual chemical bases of DNA. Using a unique silicon-based manufacturing process, we turn that digital code into actual strands of DNA in a tube. That DNA powers incredible breakthroughs, from developing new antibody therapeutics to creating bacteria that can serve as fertilizers to improve the efficiency of food production. But with this capability comes responsibility. In 2006, a journalist from The Guardian ordered a small piece of the smallpox virus to his home, exposing a gap in security. That incident was a wake-up call to the nascent DNA synthesis industry, which worked closely with the US government to build the biosecurity screening framework that we still use today. When Twist receives an order, we first verify the customer, ensuring that they're a legitimate scientist shipping to a legitimate physical address. Second, we screen the sequence. We use computational methods to reverse engineer what that DNA does, checking to see if it matches any known pathogens or toxins. If we see a risk, we investigate further and may ultimately deny the order. In some very rare cases, we may notify law enforcement. While these screening practices ensure responsible use today, the rapid rise of artificial intelligence is creating a new set of challenges, as I think we've heard here today. It's important, though, to distinguish between the 2 types of AI affecting our field. There are large language models, the chatbots we all have known and experienced. The risk here is these models lower the barrier to entry. As my colleague, Dr. Pannu, described, the frontier labs are taking this threat seriously and implementing model guardrails. But there's a second, more complex category, biological design models. So these are not chatbots, they're sophisticated engineering tools designed to create entirely new proteins to solve scientific problems. Recent models can design novel proteins that bind tightly to nearly any specific target. Tools like these are usually made available publicly as open source, empowering a broad scientific user community. And while these models offer incredible opportunity for nearly every biotech sector, including health, energy, and agriculture, they also create a security gap. The tools rarely have built-in guardrails and could be used to design harmful proteins that do not look like anything currently found in nature. Because our biosecurity systems screen for known threats, in the future, a completely novel AI-designed threat might slip through. But rest assured, industry has not been sitting still. We recently collaborated with Microsoft to test this concern. we asked, can today's AI models design toxins to evade our screens? The good news is that as of now, the answer is no. To make a functional toxin, the models still had to use significant amounts of known sequence, which our screening systems detected. But these tools are improving every day, and we don't believe that safety margin will last for very long. So we've taken action. We've worked with NIST over the past 18 months to develop standards on how to measure screening system accuracy. We also established the Sequence Biosecurity Risk Consortium to bring industry and academia together to define risks from specific biological components rather than just species. And finally, we've worked with the Nuclear Threat Initiative on tools to help our customers using these design models to communicate their legitimate intent. While industry is building defenses, we need the federal government to act decisively to sustain this American leadership, both in synthetic DNA manufacturing and global biosecurity. First, Congress should make gene synthesis screening non-negotiable. While many responsible companies screen voluntarily, it needs to be a uniform practice adopted by every provider. Federal funds should only be used to purchase synthetic DNA from providers that meet these federally mandated standards, and NIST should be funded to continue their important standards work in this area. Second, we need to shift from screening sequences to screening functions. The best protection against AI-designed threats is an AI-designed defense. We need the federal government to invest in developing the data sets and models that can predict if a novel protein structure is capable of causing harm. And third, this defense must be global. The DNA synthesis supply chain is deeply international. If we only provide these defensive tools to American companies, bad actors will simply order from overseas providers who lack these resources. This still leaves Americans vulnerable. Twist is proud to support the incredible work of our customers, and we look forward to supporting the efforts of the subcommittee to ensure the responsible use of biotechnology. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. McKnight for your 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Clark, thank you for your time today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I started my career as a Marine Corps intelligence officer. Today, I lead a business building defensive capabilities at the cutting edge of biotechnology. My core message today is that the missing component of our national security infrastructure is actually our ability to do large-scale detection of biothreats. Today, we call that persistent biothreat detection, biothreat radar. In essence, what we're doing is we're picking up biothreat chatter much earlier than you would otherwise be able to detect it. Had this been placed as an example in 2019, we likely would have been able to find the SARS-CoV-2 virus long before it was reported officially in January of 2020. We really should not be in a situation as the United States of America where we're reliant on patient zero showing up in a hospital, or like in 2019, a foreign scientist leaking information outside of their rule set. That's simply systems that are not in American control. When we say we're deploying biothreat radar at scale, what we're really doing is we're measuring places where biothreats emerge, like airports, community, wastewater, hospitals, and in the future, as we expand, you can look at borders, high-threat laboratories, and other locations that are of high risk. All of this enables the rapid response, the early response that we all seek. But I think it's also important, as you think about where we are, to frame this very tactical answer in the bigger picture. For the last 125 years, we've gone through major technological transformations: chemistry, physics, computing. Those technical transformations have changed how geopolitical power works on the planet. That is actually the moment we are in with biology today. And by those forces of economic competition alone, we know that nations, groups, and individuals globally will seek to push the cutting edge of really unimaginable biotechnology. That is mostly a very, very good thing. But also, just like those periods of history, we are in a moment where we have to accept the reality that adversaries and others will seek to explore weaponization of these capabilities. President Trump was exactly right to identify the risk of bioweapons in his speech to the United Nations in September. But right now, today, our primary biosecurity approach and most of the conversation is really around what restrictions will we place on our best scientists and our best research institutions. Obviously, restrictions, as my colleagues have pointed out, are responsible and we need to do them. But at the end of the day, What that is not, it's not the same thing as making a proactive plan to stop biosecurity threats. There's two reasons for this. For one, biology is by definition borderless. It's similar to cyber, is the way to understand it. It is vast, it is distributed, and there's no single choke point. This means that bioinnovation and risk will happen globally. It won't just happen in our shores, and just restricting our own scientists won't solve the problem. Related, restrictions will actually slow our ability to build countermeasures if we are slowing our ability to do innovation. So instead, from my perspective, to stop those threats, we need to create a large-scale, persistent, pervasive detection system for biothreats via genomic sequencing. Genomic sequencing is the foundational technology of biothreat radar. And obviously, detection systems in national security are not new concepts for us. The United States has global detection systems run by our own American security institutions across chemical, nuclear, and cyber. We look for threat attribution, where something came from. We seek to gain early warning in every other major category. Biothreat radar is the detection system for the bio category. It's the most definitive way for us to confirm the precise identity of pathogens and inform the origin of that threat. Those are the two things you need for rapid response and perhaps most importantly, especially over the arc of time, credible deterrence of threats. The framework for this persistent biothreat detection system started during the pandemic, and we have been very fortunate to work across administrations with HHS and CDC over a number of years to continue to expand the concept. Most recently, President Trump's administration called for a significant expansion of biothreat radar at HHS and CDC, as well as the Department of War. Additionally, the State Department, more recently, along with HHS and CDC, has been working on bilateral negotiations with nations incorporating biothreat radar as a piece of those expansionary programs. Each of these biothreat radar programs should be expanded to ensure America, its allies, have trusted, transparent, and sovereign capabilities for biothreat detection. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Dr. Havers for her 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Clark, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on biosecurity at the intersection of artificial intelligence and biology. My name is Fiona Havers, and I'm a physician who served for 13 years as a medical officer at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention before resigning in June 2025. My work focused on respiratory pathogens, including novel influenza viruses and SARS-CoV-2. I worked on multiple emergency outbreak responses, including deployments to China during the avian influenza A H7N9 outbreak and to Liberia during the Ebola epidemic. In early 2020, I joined the CDC COVID-19 emergency response, where I led national seroprevalence studies and later a surveillance network that monitored COVID-19 and RSV hospitalizations. I am also a practicing physician and served as a frontline healthcare worker during the 2009 H1N1 influenza and the COVID-19 pandemics. We will almost certainly experience additional pandemics in our lifetime. As we've heard from the other witnesses, the risk is even greater as artificial intelligence and other new technologies lower the barriers to creating pathogens with pandemic potential. Core elements of pandemic preparedness are the same whether a pathogen originates in a laboratory or emerges from a zoonotic source. Regardless of how or where the next pandemic begins, America must be ready to respond. Despite the lessons of COVID-19, I believe the United States is now less capable of responding to emerging pathogens, regardless of their origin, than it was at the outset of the pandemic in 2020. My testimony focuses on 3 ways this administration has weakened pandemic preparedness: staffing and funding cuts that undermine public health infrastructure, a departure from evidence-based vaccine policy that has eroded trust in federal guidance, and reductions in scientific research funding that have stifled innovation. A robust public health response depends on strong public health institutions. Since this administration began, thousands of CDC experts have been fired, forced out, or have resigned or retired early. Multiple programs have been eliminated, including some that protect frontline workers, and communications staff essential for crisis messaging have been fired. As a result, CDC's ability to rapidly mobilize during emergencies has been weakened. State and local public health departments have also been weakened by efforts to claw back federal funding intended to modernize surveillance and build capacity, while withdrawal from the World Health Organization has reduced our ability to detect and monitor novel pathogens abroad, together reducing visibility into emerging threats and impairing pandemic response. Beyond weakening public health infrastructure, this administration has also undermined vaccines, one of our most critical tools in any pandemic. Operation Warp Speed demonstrated what is possible when academia, government, and industry work together. However, this administration has undermined confidence in vaccines and moved away from evidence-based recommendations. On June 9th, 2025, Secretary Kennedy dismissed all members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, a decision that led directly to my resignation 1 week later. At that point, I no longer had confidence that CDC data, including data I was scheduled to present to that committee, would be evaluated objectively or with scientific rigor, and I was unwilling to lend scientific credibility to a process likely to promote dangerous misinformation about vaccines. Those concerns have since been borne out. Long-standing evidence-based review processes have been abandoned, transparency has declined, and misleading information has been presented in public meetings. ACIP has issued harmful recommendations, including ending routine hepatitis B vaccination at birth, an action opposed by major medical organizations, and one that will likely result in preventable illnesses and deaths in American children. The erosion of trust in CDC vaccine guidance has serious consequences. Clinicians face fragmented recommendations, the public is increasingly confused, and in a future pandemic, this loss of confidence will cost lives. It may also weaken disease surveillance if state and local health partners hesitate to share data with federal agencies they no longer trust. Scientific innovation critical to preparedness has also been undermined. Cuts to mRNA research, including funding for an avian influenza A H5N1 vaccine, along with reduced NIH funding and regulatory instability at FDA, threaten the development of countermeasures we will need when the next pandemic emerges. In closing, I want to speak briefly as a physician. In May 2020, I watched patients die in overcrowded ICUs while carrying my N95 mask in a brown paper bag during PPE shortages, and I isolated from my family to protect them from a virus we barely understood. I felt profound relief when I was vaccinated in early 2021. The next pandemic, whether it originates in a laboratory or from a zoonotic source, could be far worse than COVID-19. Biosecurity and pandemic preparedness are bipartisan issues. I urge this committee to exercise its oversight authority to halt the destruction of our public health and scientific institutions, restore evidence-based leadership, and ensure that the United States is prepared for the next pandemic. Thank you.
I thank you for your testimony, and we will now move to questioning. I will begin and recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Pannu, in your testimony, you described biological AI models and the threat of their misuse as raising the ceiling of harm. Would you agree that while the capabilities and potential risks of these models are difficult to measure, proactive steps to safeguard against their misuse are necessary before another major threat emerges?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. Yes, I do agree that proactive measures are necessary. I think that biological AI models that could pose societal risk are a small subset of overall biology, AI-enabled biology research. That small subset needs to be better defined and scoped, and oversight should be conducted for those models.
Given the rapid advancements that we're seeing in AI and synthetic biology, how urgent is it to be proactive and conduct oversight and mitigate risks as a part of any overreaching strategy, actually to protect the medical safety of all Americans?
Thank you for the question. I think that the rapid pace of AI advances do warrant proactive oversight of this technology for risks that can be anticipated. I think society has had a challenging time exactly predicting how and when AI will advance. And so rather than relying on guesswork or prediction, we should have methods for evaluating capability advancement.
Thank you. Mr. McKnight, recent reports have indicated that China is collecting large amounts of biological data, both from their own population and from abroad. This data could be used to develop AI programs with some of the concerning capabilities that we have discussed here this morning. Let's hone in on that. What types of biological data do you think are the most vulnerable to being misused when paired with AI?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the question. The way we think about biological data and the threat that it poses is if you think about the entire planet, the vast majority of biological data is the code that Dr. Diggans talked about. All of the living things on the planet are coded in DNA. Today, to a first-order approximation, we monitor very little of it. If you think about the corollaries with cybersecurity or with any other type of security where we're looking at any adversarial threat constantly, persistently, pervasively, the challenge is when you take that diversity of information and then you combine it with AI tools, the threat frontier of what could be made changes dramatically. And until we are able to defend by using the same AI tools that we use to create new models and flip them around to interpret data coming out of the environment, whether it's natural or man-made, we are going to be essentially blind in detecting this brand new, amazing number of threats that could be invented over the next 1 to 50 years. And I think it's very important we recognize the scale of the challenge that is facing us.
Dr. Diggans, are the DNA synthesis screening regulations that are currently in place adequate to protect against malicious actors seeking to create a bioweapon?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. We don't feel they are. Their current regulations focus on acquisition and possession of cultures, live species, viruses, things like that. There's very little direct regulation of the synthesis industry itself, and we feel that mandating these screening practices is an important route to help spread the broad adoption and global uniformity of these practices.
In follow-up, Dr. Diggans, do you see a pathway where an AI-generated sequence designed to evade sequence screening algorithms is able to bypass the current safeguards?
So the work we've done with Microsoft, I think, has shown that the current generation of models is not sufficiently good at doing that. But we certainly see the capability of these models improving, and the next 2 to 3 years, that's not an unlikely scenario.
Elaborate on that. Do you see where advances in biologic design models can lead to sequences that can totally evade any attempts at detection? Is that a possibility?
On the individual protein function level, yes. So thinking like something like a toxin, redesigning that, I think there's a good chance in the next 2 to 3 years where you might see proteins where we wouldn't be able to detect.
In my final few seconds here, in your testimony, you stated that you screen requests for genetic material and that you at Twist have denied some of those requests. How frequently has that occurred in the last 6 months, year?
It's extremely infrequent, which I think we should all find comforting. It's happened maybe a dozen times over the 10 years that I've been at Twist.
And have you seen that change since you've been at Twist? You said that that's a relatively small number over a 10-year time span. Have you seen in recent years an increased number of requests that you have had to deny?
I can't say that we've seen an appreciable increase in that rate, no.
I thank you. My time has expired. I yield now to the ranking member for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Republicans on this subcommittee have spent this year burying their heads in the sand as Secretary Kennedy and President Trump decimate this country's ability to prepare for and respond to future pandemics. America needs to prepare to respond to all health threats, whether it's a virus that jumps from an animal to a human or a bioweapon designed using AI by malicious actors targeting Americans. Instead, because of the lies being told by President Trump and Secretary Kennedy, we are becoming more vulnerable to diseases like measles that are preventable and have been practically eliminated from the United States. Dr. Havers, you resigned from the CDC in protest of Secretary Kennedy's unscientific attacks on vaccines, our best defense in the event of a biological threat. HHS has yet to respond to multiple requests from Democrats related to these dangerous policies. Because Republicans have refused to conduct oversight of Secretary Kennedy's reckless behavior, can you please walk us through what you saw happening at CDC that led to your resignation?
So the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices plays a critical role in establishing evidence-based, science-based vaccine policy for 340 million Americans. With Secretary Kennedy firing that committee and replacing them with people who are ideologically driven, who are not qualified, and who have an anti-vaccine standpoint, I knew that this committee would be weaponized to further spread anti-vaccine propaganda. We would see falling vaccination rates in the population. We would see an increase in vaccine-preventable deaths. And we will see diseases like measles running rampant throughout the population. All of this has happened. I think since I resigned in June, we've seen a CDC director resign for refusing to rubber stamp in advance. recommendations coming out of this committee. We've seen further loss of expertise and further undermining of CDC's reputation. The fact that Secretary Kennedy hijacked a CDC website and put up information linking vaccines to autism on an official government document was a gut punch to everyone who's ever worked at CDC. That was done without scientific review or scientific clearance. And actions like this have undermined CDC's credibility with state and local health partners, with professional medical societies, and with the public.
So hold on, let me, shortly after you resign, you said that if Secretary Kennedy's undermining of vaccines, quote, isn't stopped and his policies aren't reversed, quote, immediately, a lot of Americans are going to die as a result of vaccine-preventable diseases, end quote. What consequences will Secretary Kennedy's crusade against vaccines have for Americans, including if we are faced with a pandemic emergency?
So the erosion of confidence in vaccines and the decades of misinformation that Secretary Kennedy and others have been spreading has led to diminished vaccination coverage. We are already seeing pediatric measles deaths. We also saw 280 American children die of influenza last year, the vast majority of whom were unvaccinated. That's the highest level of pediatric deaths since the 2009 H1N1 pandemic. We're about to enter a flu vaccine, a probably fairly bad flu season, and we have tens of thousands of older Americans who die of influenza every year. If vaccination rates drop, confidence is further eroded, and fewer Americans are vaccinated, we will see an increase in unnecessary deaths. In addition, if we have a pandemic and a safe and effective vaccine is developed and is developed quickly and rolled out, I think the lack of confidence in vaccines will mean that uptake will be lower than it could be, and people will die unnecessarily.
So when Secretary Kennedy took office, he claimed that he would bring with him radical transparency, but this administration and Secretary Kennedy's HHS has refused to answer questions from Congress, repeatedly misled the public about what decisions are being made that affect the nation's health, and what evidence, if any, supports these decisions. Dr. Havers, in your testimony, you offer some dire warnings about the consequences of the actions being taken by this administration. I have real concerns that unqualified anti-science individuals continue to be elevated across HHS, including at the FDA, CDC, and NIH. Since Secretary Kennedy has not been transparent, let me ask you instead, is this administration relying on qualified people to make decisions on how to protect the health of Americans?
Absolutely not. The administration has placed numerous political appointees into agencies like CDC, where they're promoting anti-vaccine ideology and are making decisions that are not based on science and that are not based on evidence, and that is leading to dangerous policies that will cost American lives.
Thank you, Dr. Havers. Congressional Republicans have let the Trump administration gut HHS unimpeded. It's deeply disturbing that Republicans have let the chaos unleashed by this administration, which Dr. Havers just described, go unchecked. Thank you, Dr. Havers, for your years of service and for standing up for the health of the American people. With that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. So, Dr. Pannu, what are the current barriers to bioterrorism, and how might they be lowered by advances in AI and synthetic biology?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. There are a few different ways that these barriers could be lowered that the field is tracking. One that I mentioned previously is large language models providing expert biology knowledge to users that don't otherwise have that knowledge. That's referred to as uplift, and the frontier models that frontier AI companies that develop those models are working on implementing safeguards for that. The other way that the barriers are being reduced is the expertise needed to use biological AI models to design novel pathogens or toxins. There is also the barrier of the digital to physical divide, which is something that gene synthesis screening addresses. Those are protocols that prevent delivery of those pathogens or toxins to users, and policies to ensure gene synthesis screening is mandatory would be beneficial there.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. McKnight, to my knowledge, an AI-enabled biological threat has not been developed. Can you tell me how easy it would be to use AI-enabled technology to create a biological threat?
I think the important thing is that our adversaries or groups that seek to do harm understand the impact that biology has had and does have on societies. So the incentive, as we increase capabilities to create novel pathogens or modify natural pathogens, the incentives to use those capabilities to reduce the economic, political, and social will of America, as we've evidenced through the results of the pandemic, continue to increase, attendant with the technical capabilities to do so. Unless we take and create a significant deterrence architecture, which we have done in other domains, the idea that the advantage of using those capabilities is real. And what I mean by that is today, if somebody were to do something, we have an inability to detect that and do attribution of where it came from. So there's an inability for us to truly, with unity, hold somebody accountable for using these capabilities. And then secondarily, with our response infrastructure, unless we continue to invest in our response infrastructure, they will see an opportunity to impact our nation. So the two things, detection so that we can find who did it, and response so that we can show it won't work, are the two critical things to mitigate what is a really expansive area of innovation that is hard to our point previously, hard to regulate every piece of it, especially when the actors that seek to use these technologies are outside of our regulatory sphere.
Thank you for that. It's just amazing what can be done, isn't it? It's scary, and it's also exciting in terms of what can be done to be helpful with it. So, Dr. Diggans, what steps, talking about exciting area, DNA synthesis, what steps could be taken in DNA synthesis operations that would make it harder for a threat actor to obtain dangerous DNA?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. So we first would be mandating synthesis screening as a uniform practice across all providers in the country, and restricting federal R&D funds so that we capture international providers as well. What you don't want to do is to drive the customer base to use international companies who intentionally don't screen their order systems. The second would be to begin to build data sets and models that can predict when an arbitrary protein sequence can create some form of harm. Right now, much of our defenses are built around looking for known pathogens and toxins. And these AI biodesign models allow us to kind of step back from that and to generalize the idea of how does a protein cause harm? And we're not very good at that right now. And so this is, I think, a really important role the federal government can play to develop those data sets and models that can generalize that detection response.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. McKnight, how do we protect sensitive biological data sets while supporting open scientific research?
Thank you for the question. This is a very critical one. The reality is today, we need to generate more biological data first. Protection is a critical component of it. But without the amount of data we need to focus on developing good solutions to counteract adversarial development, we're actually in an imbalance of data protection today. But then very directly to the question, we need to treat biological data with the same privacy restrictions that we treat our most sensitive data, both in the national security community on the intelligence side, and also as it relates to human privacy.
Thank you. Thank you. My time's expired now. Yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Pallone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we move to my questions, I just wanted to again say that this hearing is incomplete without testimony from Secretary Kennedy. I don't think we can address this threat without hearing directly from the HHS Secretary. So pursuant to Clause 2K6 of House Rule 11, I move that the Committee on Energy and Commerce issue a subpoena to HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. to testify before the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I move to table that motion.
The motion is not debatable. There has been a motion to table the motion for the subpoena. All those in favor of tabling this,
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask for a roll call.
the gentleman asks for a roll call vote, and the clerk will record the call.
Mr. Balderson? Mr. Balderson votes aye. Mr. Palmer? Mr. Palmer votes aye. Mr. Crenshaw? Mr. Crenshaw votes aye. Mr. Weber? Mr. Weber votes aye. Mr. Allen? Mr. Allen votes aye. Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Fulcher votes aye. Mrs. Harshbarger? Mrs. Harshbarger votes aye. Mr. Rulli? Mr. Rulli votes aye. Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Guthrie votes aye. Ms. Clark? Ms. Clark votes no. Ms. DeGette? Ms. DeGette votes no. Mr. Tonko? Mr. Tonko votes no. Mr. Han? Mr. Han votes no. Ms. Fletcher? Ms. Fletcher votes no. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez? Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes no. Mr. Mullen? Mr. Mullen votes no. Mr. Pallone? Mr. Pallone votes no. Chairman Joyce? Chairman Joyce votes aye.
The clerk will report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 10 ayes and 8 noes.
The ayes have it, and the motion to table is agreed to. The committee will now resume the hearing. Mr. Pallone is recognized for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. First, Dr. Havers, I want to thank you for your years of service at the CDC and your work as a physician on the front lines of multiple disease outbreaks and pandemics. I am incredibly concerned that the Trump administration is putting the health of Americans at risk by cutting healthcare coverage, refusing to practice real science, and spreading misinformation and disinformation, particularly about vaccines. So let me ask you, Dr. Havers, is the country at risk of diseases that we had beaten back, measles, polio, chickenpox, coming back again due to the actions of this administration?
Absolutely. We're already seeing this happening.
And as you explained in your testimony, you resigned from the CDC in protest of Secretary Kennedy firing all the members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. So, Dr. Havers, what impact do the decisions of ACIP have on our country's ability to prevent or respond to public health threats? And what do you think the consequences of the current ACIP's decisions will be on the country's health?
So historically, this committee was very important that there was one immunization schedule for the United States. There were transparent processes where all liaison organizations, for example, the American Academy of Pediatrics or the American College of Physicians, would weigh in, give scientific input. There was a rigorous scientific evidence-based process that occurred before any vote. So this vaccine schedule was trusted universally by clinicians. What we're seeing happening now with a firing of ACIP and the replacement by an ideologically driven committee is that we're seeing not only critical recommendations being taken away, but we're also seeing clinicians being confused, state and local health departments and organizations are coming up with their own vaccine schedules. And this has done incredible damage to CDC's reputation. Trusted partners are now saying we cannot trust CDC because of what this committee has done. Furthermore, doing things like removing the universal hepatitis B birth dose recommendation, which has been in place for more than 30 years and was credited with basically eliminating pediatric hepatitis B in infants and children in the United States. They voted to remove that recommendation. That is going to cost children lives. Like, that will kill. We're going to see preventable deaths occurring. So not only has this administration taken a sledgehammer to CDC's credibility, but they are making decisions that are going to lead directly to an increase in vaccine-preventable deaths, while making it much harder for frontline healthcare workers, such as pediatricians, to have conversations about what vaccines should be recommended, why they're recommending something that CDC no longer recommends, because they are doing what is based on science, what is based on evidence, and CDC is no longer issuing recommendations that are based on science.
Well, during the first Trump administration, Operation Warp Speed brought together government, research institutions, and drug manufacturers to quickly develop, manufacture, and deploy COVID-19 vaccines. It was a huge achievement, and I'm worried that if we tried the same thing today, we would not have willing partners in industry, an appropriately resourced research and public health workforce, or a public even willing to take whatever treatment or vaccine is developed. So, Dr. Havers, if we suddenly found ourselves dealing with a new pandemic threat, whether man-made or from nature, are we better off or worse off than we were before COVID-19 because of the actions of the Trump administration?
We are unquestionably worse off.
And if there were a lot of hard-earned lessons from COVID-19, I mean, I think that we all saw, it seems like the Trump administration is hell-bent on ignoring the lessons from COVID-19 and erasing any progress in science and public health. So my last question is, what are the top things that you think the government should be doing to keep Americans healthy and safety that the Trump administration is not currently doing?
Well, this administration needs to move back to policies that are driven by science and not ideology. It needs to invest in public health infrastructure, strengthen local state and local health departments, as well as CDC, and stop attacking experts for science, for making decisions based on science. I think we are definitely, I mean, there are also, as we're hearing, we need to invest heavily in science, not cut NIH grants that could lead to novel innovations that could protect us in the next pandemic. FDA needs to be returned to having a standard regulatory process so that industry and other partners will see the United States as an environment where they can develop novel therapies and then have sort of a standard process that if they meet certain benchmarks, they know it can get approved. I think having an ideologically driven HHS leaderships means that whole environment has been upended. I think we're losing scientists to go abroad. I think innovation and other things will, scientific innovation and research is being ground to a halt. And we are lacking our public health infrastructure that it will allow us to respond to pandemics has been significantly weakened in this administration.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the vice chairman of the committee, Mr. Balderson, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. My first question is for Dr. Diggans. Thank you, sir, for being here. What are AI-enabled biological threats, and how do they differ from traditional biological threats?
Thank you for the question. So what we have seen is a rapid rise in the ability to engineer naturally occurring sequences using AI models, so to change the underlying protein sequence that defines the structure and function of a protein. And as these models get more and more sophisticated, the need to adhere to protein sequences that are found in nature diminishes. And so what that essentially means is that you can start to reproduce functions that might be capable of causing some kind of harm, but not reuse any of the sequences from nature that we rely on to detect threat in our order stream. And so that divergence between things we understand from nature and biological function, those things historically have always been tightly coupled, and AI models are allowing those to begin to drift apart.
Thank you. Is AI capable of creating biological threats today?
Not to the degree that we cannot detect it still. So right now, models can be asked to, for example, change the sequence of a toxin to try and maintain the structure, but change the sequence. But they're unable to do so in a way that doesn't reuse some of the sequence from the original protein. And so our systems still detect it.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is for Mr. McKnight. Mr. McKnight, thank you for being here today. How is AI altering the traditional biological threat landscape for both state and non-state actors?
Thank you for the question. I think there's an interesting way to understand what's happening that we've seen in other domains, and I use the cyber domain. Generally, we don't classify something as a domain of operations, and remember I have a military background, until we as humans are able to access it with engineering. So we added space as a domain when it truly became accessible via modern rocketry. Same thing back in the 1890s with the oceans. Once we had coal-fired shipping, it became accessible. So with biology, I think the way to conceptualize the landscape of your question is it is now a domain in which humans can interact with it with engineering capabilities. And that fundamentally changes how we think about the opportunities as we generate new engineering tools to create anything out of a foundation of nature. But it also changes how we must think about the scale of investment in defense. It's like when we move cyber from the IT department into cyber command. It's a fundamental reorientation, and the way to think about that is, I think, really how we need to be scaling the investment that we're making as a country with the new capabilities of compute, AI, plus our knowledge of biology. That creates a surface that we really will continue to be behind until we reframe fundamentally how we are monitoring and responding to those new capabilities.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is for Dr. Pannu. Thank you for being here. What specific biological capabilities could AI make more accessible or feasible for actors who previously lacked the expertise to create or modify pathogens?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chairman. Overall, as you've heard multiple times today, there's incredible promise that comes from some of the AI-enabled biological research that's being done. And with that great promise, there will be new capabilities. In terms of biological AI models, there are models that are used, for example, to predict the properties of pandemic pathogens or modify those properties. I think it's for those models, that narrow subset, that there are particular concerns that if misused, they could pose societal level harms.
Thank you. And Dr. Diggans, back to you. And we have 40 seconds. Could AI meaningfully reduce the knowledge historically required to carry out advanced genetic engineering?
Thank you for the question. I think on the design side, yes, not on necessarily on the physical construction and testing.
Okay. If so, what risks and benefits could this have? A lot.
Many.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Representative Dingell for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can all agree that a strong public health and biodefense system is critical to keep Americans safe. But as Dr. Haver so eloquently stated in her opening statement and then in questioning, because of this administration's dangerous denial of science and also their irresponsible budget cuts to the agencies responsible for biodefense, early detection and addressing it is in even worse shape than it was when we had the pandemic in 2020. And let's just go back to this measles outbreak that we have. 168 South Carolinians are in quarantine, and many of them might spend Christmas that way. Of 135 confirmed cases in the outbreak, 127 of the people are known to be unvaccinated, and one of them, only one, was fully vaccinated against measles. We've had nearly 2,000 measles cases nationwide this year, the most since 1992, meaning we have erased almost 30 years of progress in just 11 months, and we're likely going to lose our measles elimination status. Let that sink in. Dr. Havers, what has led to this?
A number of things have led to this, but I think the most important one is that decades of anti-vaccine misinformation spread by Secretary Kennedy and others have led to declining measles vaccination rates in the population and a loss of herd immunity, meaning that once measles is introduced into a community, it can spread unchecked. Once it is spreading, it is very hard to contain. It's one of the most infectious pathogens that we have. So I think, but in this setting, in this administration, has failed to control these outbreaks. Local public health that's needed for contact tracing and response are inadequately funded. Communications coming out of CDC have been mixed. And we have a health secretary that is, on one hand, saying, yes, I support vaccination during an outbreak, but then is putting false information linking vaccines and autism on an official CDC website. I am not surprised we have not been, this administration, we have not been able to control this.
And let's talk about that. Earlier this year, the administration cut $11.4 billion for the state and local public health people that you're saying are the ones that have to track this. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, huge funding cuts have
And
happened.
a lot of that was restored to blue states after they sued in court, but others are still out billions of dollars meant for public health. How does that impact our preparedness to take on an emerging biological threat?
Well, I think that weakening state and local public health departments means that we are unable to, we will not have the resources on the ground to respond to a threat. I also think that there's a risk that in this environment where federal funding is cut to areas that have weaker state and local health departments, we'll see greater disparities and greater harm and greater negative impacts of a potential pandemic in, for example, red states that don't have a strong local health department.
Which is crazy. That's crazy. Now, Mr. Chairman, as you know, I'm the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee, and on February 19th, March 7th, April 1st, September 3rd, September 4th, September 10th, September 17th, September 18th, and December 12th. I requested hearings on behalf of my subcommittee to no avail on this. The Health Subcommittee, in the midst of this breakout and crisis, has not met since September, and the Health Subcommittee has only met 9 times this Congress between hearings and markups, and I think this is because the majority is afraid of bringing RFK Jr. in, as Mr. Pallone moved that we do. I just want to put in the record a sampling of the devastation of our public health agencies and capabilities that RFK Jr. has presided over, in no particular order. Testifying to Congress that he had no awareness of DOJ's activities that devastated research, either lying about his involvement or allowing an unauthorized entity to run amok in his own department without his knowledge. Firing the new CDC director, Susan Monterez, within weeks of her confirmation, and forcing the resignation of multiple other CDC senior leaders like Dr. Haver, sitting right here today, completely destabilizing our nation's public health agency. Removing all members of ACIP and installing compromised, unqualified loyalists, leading to the end of an evidence-based recommendation for universal hepatitis B vaccination, cutting U.S. support for mRNA research, which is what helped us get the COVID vaccine. I could go on, but my time is ending. This is why, Mr. Chairman, early in the new year, first week of January, I demand that we have a hearing in the House Subcommittee with RFK Jr. so he can come and talk to us about how he's going to reverse these dangerous policies that he's instituted. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes Dr. Harshberger for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'll start with Dr. Pannu. Are there early warning indicators, whether they're digital, biological, or supply chain, that could help identify AI-enabled biological misuse? Because you talked about that digital to physical barrier.
Thank you for the question. I think that supporting that kind of capability would be very important. I can't say that I'm personally aware of the existence of something that is robust and addresses all the points that you raised, but we should certainly invest in having such capabilities. Okay. Thank you.
What about you, Dr. Diggans?
I would echo that answer. I'm not aware of any capability that exists now, but I think it's important that we build it.
Mr. McKnight?
Yes, one of the key capabilities that we work on is when you take a sample with biothreat radar from an airport or from a community or from a threat location, you bring it and you do DNA sequencing with it, and the DNA sequencing data comes off the sequencer. And then we have a set of tools that we're constantly developing with cutting-edge machine learning and AI to analyze that DNA and tell you what's in it. What different types of pathogens? Are there new things that you haven't seen? And one of the very specific tools that we work on that was developed in conjunction with IARPA, the intelligence community's DARPA, is a tool that actually looks and algorithmically scores to identify if something has been genetically engineered or not, to give you a sense of could this have been made or designed with different types of tools. And those are the types of things we really need. When you invest in biothreat radar, you're investing in those types of capabilities as part of a system that will continue to evolve.
Well, this goes into my next question. Are export controls effective at restricting adversarial access to certain AI models, biological data, software, automated lab equipment? Mr. McKnight?
I think there's two important parts of that question. As it relates to export controls, like we look at every other area of technology, it's certainly not my core area of expertise, but it is something that very much merits continued review. The other side that I worry more about is because of what I mentioned in my opening remarks, right? Biology is borderless. We know because it is distributed, it can be done, and I think Dr. Diggans and I talk a lot about the DNA, even the DNA synthesis screening topic. Well, adversaries aren't going to follow our rules. You can make DNA in a garage or in your own laboratory, so there's other ways to get around if you look for nefarious purposes. So unless we are aggressively investing in our own innovation,
Yeah.
adversaries outside or other places outside of the country they don't need our export. They will build their own capabilities that will outpace what we do.
Well, it's what Dr. Diggins said about two reputable companies that make synthetic DNA. That's a little bit frightful. And Mr. McKnight, you said that we need a large-scale system to detect biothreats. So which nations are we working with on these biothreats?
Yeah, yes, I think thank you for that question. I think when we talk about the concept of biothreat detection or bioradar, as I mentioned, this was a concept started during the pandemic and has continued over multiple different administrations. The president's budget calls for biothreat radar expansion at CDC and HHS today. That is absolutely critical. But also at State Department, what is going on is in the process of negotiating a set of new bilateral MOUs with our friends and allies around the world. They are incorporating the concept of biothreat radar in partnership with HHS CDC to deploy that in a similar way in countries that are partners with us. So then you can see how that develops a system where there's a US-built and partnered technical system for verification of biothreats on a bilateral and then multilateral basis with our partners. And that's being worked on by the State Department today. Just 2 weeks ago, they announced the first of those during the MOU with Rwanda with the announcement of the DRC-Rwanda peace agreement.
Good. I've got like 40 seconds left, and I guess Dr. Diggins or Dr. Pannu, is it possible for scientists to put like a watermark or a distinctive genetic signature in a modified virus to show where it came from?
There are mechanisms for doing that. However, there are also mechanisms for removing those watermarks. And so the idea that they're persistent is difficult to ensure.
Dr. Pannu?
I second that comment exactly. I think the other challenge is once you have a virus that's out in nature, we don't know whether those watermarks persist over time.
Yeah, so it's not that accurate, is what you're saying. Okay, thank you to the witnesses, and I yield back, sir.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes Mr. Tonko for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It has been very concerning to watch this administration's relentless attacks on science and the abandonment of scientific integrity in our federal health agencies. Decisions about health care must be free of political interference and based on science, not extreme ideology. So, Dr. Havers, according to your testimony and other public statements, you resigned from CDC in large part due to what you perceived as its loss of scientific credibility. In what ways has Secretary Kennedy undermined CDC's scientific credibility, and what are the consequences of that for Americans' health?
Secretary Kennedy has undermined CDC's scientific credibility, in large part, as I've mentioned, by using CDC as a mouthpiece for the anti-vaccine movement. They're putting false information on CDC websites. They're curtailing communications coming out of CDC, and using vaccine policy meetings that used to have the highest standard of scientific rigor to now promote false information and calling into question the safety and efficacy of well-established vaccine recommendations. If state and local health partners are saying they can no longer trust CDC guidance, I think if we had another pandemic, CDC's ability to lead a coordinated federal response when we've lost the trust of the medical community, we've squashed scientific innovation and taken away tools that would be most useful for us in the next pandemic, including mRNA vaccines, and state and local health partners no longer trust us, we are not an ability, the US no longer has an ability to have an effective federal response, given what this administration has done.
Thank you. And Secretary Kennedy is destroying the guardrails once in place to ensure that health policies are justified by scientific evidence. For example, Secretary Kennedy announced a change in the COVID-19 vaccine schedule for children and pregnant people without any input from CDC subject matter experts. And at meetings of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, Secretary Kennedy's handpicked members have made vaccine recommendations that would take vaccines away from millions of Americans, even though there is no science to support those given decisions. The Secretary was able to get away with these changes by undermining career experts at CDC and installing ideological allies to rubber stamp his agenda. So when Secretary Kennedy ignores career scientists and only listens to his own allies, What is the effect on CDC's credibility and scientific integrity?
I mean, it has been destroyed in a few short months. I loved working at CDC. The career that I had there was incredible because I was able to do nonpartisan work that was based in science and evidence. The fact that people like me are now saying you can no longer trust recommendations coming out of CDC is shocking. I never thought I would be in a position to say something like this. And the amount of damage that this administration has done to federal scientific and public health agencies and their reputation and their credibility across the country in multiple communities, including the medical community and the scientific community and around the globe, is really heartbreaking, honestly.
Well, we've not only seen Secretary Kennedy ignore experts, but we've also seen him retaliate against civil servants who challenge his anti-vaccine agenda. For example, he pushed President Trump to fire CDC Director Susan Manaras after she refused to sign off on ACIP's vaccine recommendations without first reviewing the evidence. And Jenna Norton, a program official at NIH, has been put on indefinite leave for speaking out against the administration's harms. So, Dr. Hammers, what effect does Secretary Kennedy's retaliatory campaign against scientists have on the integrity of their work?
Well, I think the administration has driven out many high-level experts from this administration. People are resigning because I resigned because I did not want to be lending my scientific reputation to an agency that I no longer feel is using evidence and science to make policy. And I think that the loss of expertise at CDC, NIH, FDA, and the undercutting of science-based policy across the administration, I think, is having untold effects. We do not have the expertise at these agencies to lead us through another pandemic, for example.
Let me ask our other witnesses, do you agree that it is dangerous when administration officials retaliate against scientists who disagree with harmful policies? Start with Dr. Pannu. Just a simple yes or no.
Thank you for the question. I think that retaliation is challenging to be the recipient of.
Doctor?
I think in this domain, having science lead on the policy front is important.
Sir?
I think these are incredibly complex and multifaceted topics that have a lot of dynamics in them.
But as to the retaliatory aspect?
Well, I think in general, retaliation is not an effective tool.
Thank you, sir. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer for, the chair now recognizes Mr. Allen for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. Multiple experts, Dr. Pannu, have argued that the real challenge is not gene editing itself, but how we manage its dual-use potential in a targeted, risk-proportionate way. In your view, what specific features should a modern risk-tiered oversight system include, especially for AI-enabled gene editing, so we close the gaps around defined high-risk work while avoiding unnecessary burdens on routine, low-risk research in universities and startups?
Thank you for the question. I agree with the sentiments you express in terms of needing targeted oversight that's tiered, where there's a focus on the highest consequence risks for oversight, and that enables lower risk research to proceed unencumbered. I think the best way to do that is to provide clear definitions and scoping for what constitutes the highest risk research so that researchers have that clarity and that they're able to proceed to, with doing other types of research easily.
This question is both for Dr. Pannu and Dr. Diggans. Could you explain the difference between the varying types of AI models, such as general purpose large language models, or LLMs, that power generative AI platforms like ChatGPT, and biodesign tools such as AlphaFold or Evo1 and Evo2?
Thank you for the question. Overall, I think many of us here are familiar with using LLMs and the knowledge that they can provide when queried. Next, further advancements are reasoning models, which can do multiple steps of reasoning and address complex problems. AI agents can allow users to conduct tasks, and all of these models can also assist users in writing code. On the biological AI model side, those can allow us to understand biology, whether it's proteins or genetic sequences. And overall, what the research community is hoping to move towards is the integration of AI agents, LLMs, with biological AI models to enable fully autonomous science.
Good, thank you. Dr. Diggans?
Maybe I'll add to what my colleague, Dr. Pannu, has said to say that the way we think about guardrails for these two classes of models is very different. So on the LLM side, you're looking for what kinds of knowledge you want to prevent the transfer. On the biodesign models, we don't have a good sense of what kinds of individual functions or questions people are asking these models that we want to control. And so I think that speaks broadly to a set of knowledge that we need to work on developing at the individual biological component level of what kinds of risk do we want to identify and control.
This is for Dr. Diggans and Mr. McKnight. How accessible are AI tools that could meaningfully lower barriers to engineering pathogens or designing harmful biological constructs?
I'm sorry, Congressman, the question was how accessible are these tools?
How accessible are the AI tools?
Quite accessible in terms of their public availability. Many of them can be technically complex to use, and so the skill set required to use them may be fairly sophisticated. However, there's a lot of effort underway to rightly bring that down, to broaden the audience for these tools among the scientific community.
Mr. McKnight?
Yes, maybe I'll combine the answer to that with a build on the previous one. I think if we as a country, the thing that we should be setting as almost the spec that we expect to be able to deliver and measuring is how fast can we go from detecting a biological threat, natural or human-caused, somewhere on the planet to a countermeasure. And that takes a set of steps where we are monitoring globally, persistently, pervasively, using these AI tools that we're talking about to interpret that data in real time and rapidly to enable design of countermeasure or intervention, whether that be policy or otherwise. Our real-time test was about 9 months during COVID. There's the 100-day mission, but I think our North Star with these modern tools should be something closer to, maybe it takes 20 years, but we should be thinking about doing that in minutes and hours, like we do with cybersecurity, not days, months, or years.
Well, it's been said that we weren't, we're not prepared for another COVID event. We were not prepared for the first COVID event. What can this do to help us prepare for the second COVID event?
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing that we all lived through. We dropped the ball. We couldn't develop a diagnostic test at the beginning of the pandemic, and it took us a long time to respond. If you do prepare via both our public health and national security institutions, detection capabilities that can rapidly inform what types of tests to make, what types of interventions to create, that infrastructure can collapse the amount of time. And that's something that doesn't exist today. No matter what, we need to invest to create that. It didn't exist at the beginning either.
Okay, thank you.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Ms. Trahan for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses here today. Dr. Havers, you testified that we will almost certainly face future pandemics, and that despite the lessons of COVID-19, the United States is now less prepared to respond than we were in 2020. Since January, more than 1,450 research grants have been terminated, cutting over $750 million in funding in the name of government efficiency. Researchers say that this has wasted years of taxpayer-funded work and forced critical studies to just shut down. Some of those terminated grants include projects to improve recruitment for Alzheimer's clinical trials, increase vaccine uptake, study in utero exposure to contaminants in drinking water, prevent sexually transmitted infections with common antibiotics, test flu and COVID vaccine reminder tests, prevent HIV transmission and train HIV researchers and public health professionals, support early career scientists, and train the next generation of pediatric researchers. I mean, these cuts are creating a lost generation of scientists, shrinking graduate and postdoctoral training programs, blocking young researchers from securing funding to start labs or launch studies, and pushing some to just leave the country altogether. You've testified that changes to the CDC have made us less safe. Do cuts to critical research and the disruption of our healthcare and public health workforce pipelines make us any safer?
No, they do not. And I think that we've heard from the other witnesses that we need to have all the tools possible to combat pandemic threats, including those generated or coming from AI. And all of these cuts that you listed and the fact that we are hamstringing ourselves in terms of scientific innovation in this country under this administration means that we will not have those tools available to us in the next pandemic.
Thanks. I mean, this isn't a temporary disruption. It is a long-term brain drain that weakens our public health preparedness, our research capacity, and just the stability of our national scientific enterprise. On that note, I do want to turn to the reauthorization of the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act, or PAPA. In the years since COVID-19, Congress has failed to reauthorize PAPA in a meaningful way, leaving core preparedness programs in limbo. Programs like the Hospital Preparedness Program, Public Health Emergency Preparedness Grants, and the Strategic National Stockpile currently lack clear reauthorization, despite being foundational to our national response capacity. Dr. Havers, as Congress considers reauthorizing PAPA, what specific priorities should guide that effort to ensure that we strengthen our preparedness, especially in light of emerging technologies like AI, rather than repeat the vulnerabilities that we saw in 2020?
As has been mentioned, we were not as well prepared for the 2020 pandemic, for the COVID pandemic in 2020 as we could have been. And I think that there were gaps that were identified, including in sort of data modernization, in laboratory testing capabilities, in rapid deployment of medical countermeasures, adequacy of PPE and other protections for frontline healthcare workers. And we were successful in rapidly deploying a vaccine, but it still took a year. And I think that investing in basic public health infrastructure, strengthening surveillance systems, improving data modernization are all things that are going to be critical going forward. And what a lot of the funding cuts that have happened have decreased basic sort of on-the-ground surveillance systems. I ran COVIDNet at CDC, and the last 4 years we put a lot of time and money and energy into speeding up data collection and transfer to continue to be able to produce high-quality data. That was a system that was set up very quickly. We started collecting data in March of 2020, but that was on the back of FluSurvNet, which was an emerging infections program, a very strong surveillance system. So if you have strong existing infrastructure and a strong public health workforce and an appropriate investment in public health and in science, we will be much better prepared to rapidly respond and fill in those gaps. And I think, so I would encourage, strong funding of state and local public health, strong funding of CDC, restoring grants to NIH, and not having ideologically driven decisions being made about grants. For example, the mRNA vaccine funding that has been pulled. That has vastly weakened our pandemic preparedness for the next pathogen. mRNA vaccines is one of the most promising technologies for us to be able to rapidly deploy a vaccine if another novel pathogen came along. Yet, Secretary Kennedy has an unscientific antipathy towards mRNA vaccines and yanked $500 million of funding. That has left us worse prepared.
Thank you so much. I'll submit my last question in writing, but I appreciate your thoroughness. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher, for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McKnight, question regarding a security concern, and you've touched on this, but I'd like to try to go just a little bit deeper. We're seeing reports about autonomous agents, not just chatbots, but systems that can act on their own, hacking databases or stealing data, maybe even running a lab. Fear is that with that kind of a tool, terrorists really, all they really need is AI that can generate a weaponized sequence and ship it to a terrorist accomplice. Are we at that point where an AI agent can bridge that gap and help a bad actor develop a bioweapon?
Thank you for your question. I think pieces of this have been covered, and so we can go one step. But I think the idea that human language models, LLMs, have real risk of uplift of somebody who doesn't have the same scientific capacity, maybe as a scientist from a leading institution, and biodesign tools. I think we all are worried about what will become of those capabilities and are watching them carefully. But part of the frontier of this technology is accelerating so exponentially fast that we have to recognize that things that are being developed outside of our control create risks that we are less aware of or may not be aware of unless we increase our collection and monitoring of those efforts. I think very specifically the important point here, and this goes to the focus on monitoring like we do in other domains like cyber or nuclear, is that there's still a barrier to the wet lab, like Dr. Pannu mentioned. You have to go from digital bits and bytes to DNA to make something. And so monitoring not just the highest risk labs, but where this work is done in irresponsible ways perhaps around the world is a very important piece. I will say one last component of this that is critical to the core of the question. What we experienced with the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, essentially the lesson that I'm very worried about our adversaries have learned is how vulnerable we are and how our inability to do truly until 5 years later perhaps and get consensus around attribution of where it came from, whether it was natural or not, forget the controversy around it, it's an intelligence failure. It's a failure of our ability to do attribution on the scale of any large intelligence failure in the past. And what that means is the threats of the future, even if they came from an actor, nation state or a terrorist, they don't have to be AI generated and manufactured. It can be something natural found, layered with misinformation, disinformation that fundamentally tears at our political, economic, and social fabric. So we have to figure out what system allows us to detect and respond rapidly, because actually some of those less headline or sci-fi nefarious threats may be the more likely application from somebody that seeks to do ill.
You're confirming some of our concerns. I want to shift to Dr. Pannu. And we've touched on this as well, so forgive the repetitiveness, but I want to take maybe a different angle here. In an attempt to try to close the door on this, President Trump had the executive order back in May. And looking at the gene synthesis, if you have done this in the section of the President's EO, the gene synthesis section, can you say what specific parts of that order are actually going to stop these threats or have the best chance of stopping these threats? Can they stop that threats if implemented? And as a follow-up, what else should we in Congress be doing about this?
Thank you for the question. Overall, I'm glad that you mentioned the executive order from May. I think that's an important initiative. There are a couple of things in that I would want to highlight. The gene synthesis provisions do call on Congress to proceed with a legislative effort to make gene synthesis screening mandatory across the U.S., and that's something that Congress could advance. The other provisions on clearly defining what is dangerous gain-of-function research, those policies have yet to be released from the Office of Science and Technology Policy, so Congress could ask for an update as to those and where they currently stand.
Thank you for that. Mr. Diggans, I have actually 3 questions for you, and obviously I don't have time to do it, so I'm going to submit those in writing and just thank you all for participating today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Ms. Fletcher for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Ranking Member Clark for holding this hearing today. Thank you to our witnesses for your testimony, for being here. As several of my colleagues have mentioned already, many of us are fearful because the actions that we've seen from President Trump and this administration make us less prepared in the event of a pandemic and a public health crisis, as we've discussed today. This year, Secretary Kennedy, as everyone here knows, has fired thousands of scientists and civil servants who work to keep us safe from disease, who protect us from harmful products, and who carry out critical research to advance new cures. He has sown distrust in dedicated scientists and public servants and replaced them with quacks who deny the efficacy of modern medicine and vaccines. And he has systematically destroyed the pipeline for biomedical research, including emergency response measures to protect us from the next pandemic. Since January, the Trump administration has terminated at least 1,229 NIH research grants totaling nearly $500 million. A few examples of those terminated projects include a project that would enhance vaccine delivery in the hospitalized children, a project studying proteins that could promote resilience to Alzheimer's, projects bringing us closer to vaccines for diseases without cures like HIV. And in my home in Houston, where we have the largest medical complex in the world and where researchers are conducting this cutting-edge medical research, they are saving lives. Research done in Houston saved lives during the COVID-19 pandemic. Research being done right now in Houston will save lives during the next pandemic. And the Trump administration's policies and actions are putting that work at risk. So, Dr. Havers, I want to ask you, how has Secretary Kennedy's reckless termination of NIH grants affected our preparedness posture?
Well, I think what we've seen from this administration is, as has been mentioned, massive funding cuts, pulling back from grants, but also an introduction of ideology into who is getting grants. As I mentioned, the mRNA vaccine research that was being yanked, that was not based on science. I do think that it has a chilling effect on science, the scientific community in the United States overall. I think that the pipeline of new research and is being cut off, including young researchers entering their careers. We are not going to get talent from abroad coming to the United States to improve scientific innovation. And I think that industry is going to flee the United States because it is no longer a stable place where innovative scientific research is supported. So I think that this is going to have long-lasting cuts, and we will end up with fewer tools to combat emerging threats going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Havers. In March of 2020, Dr. Peter Hotez, who is one of my constituents and is the co-director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development, told the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology that I served on at the time that we will be fighting the COVID-19 pandemic with one hand tied behind our backs at that time because we failed to invest time and resources into vaccine research. And at great cost, we pulled through the pandemic, as we've talked about earlier today. But we are once again tying our hands behind our backs as the Trump administration makes devastating cuts to NIH research grant funding that will jeopardize so much of this work that we've been doing. And Dr. Diggans, your company sounded the alarm on federal research disruption in a filing with the SEC on November 17th, 2025. The company stated, and I'm quoting, that the administration's halt on certain federal research grants may negatively impact our industry, and, end quote, and that the, quote, prolonged reductions in such funding could slow innovation. Dr. Diggans, could you expand on this and explain how disruptions to federal research funding could slow innovation?
So as a member of the biotech supply chain, we're proud to support the research that's going on, supported by many of these grants. And so the reduction in that overall spending certainly impacts the biotech supply chain in ways that can hold back technology development or productization.
Thank you, Dr. Diggans. I think that for all of us, the pauses in funding for grants and at institutions that do critical medical research is really undoing decades of work. And this country has invested in that research and invested in this system to lead the world. And so we really need to reassert our jurisdiction here. I do believe we need to bring Secretary Kennedy in before the committee, and we need to make sure that we're protecting our medical research and our scientific research more broadly. So thank you all for your testimony and for sharing your observations and your perspectives with us. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Pannu, in your written testimony, you pointed out that there's a lot of areas in regard to biosecurity and biodefense, but you said they're under-incentivized by the private markets. What incentives are needed for biosecurity and biodefense?
Thank you for the question. I think generally pandemic preparedness has been under-incentivized by the private market because pandemics are difficult to predict and they don't represent a reliable customer segment, essentially, for the private market. And so that's where government needs to step in and provide appropriate incentives for that, and that would include supporting the development of some of the approaches we've heard today, including methods for detection, methods for response, platform technologies to enable our countermeasures development, all of those would be needed.
But shouldn't you also be anticipating that the weaponization of biologics?
Thank you for the question. I personally hope that I never need to anticipate that, but I think anticipating risks is an important part of what we do to protect the American people. And so thinking about ways we can prevent those risks from occurring is an important component of
Shouldn't we be
preparedness.
investing in that security and biodefense?
Yes.
No one wants to anticipate it.
Yes.
No one wants to conceive that any nation would be so heinous toward another nation that they would unleash a biological weapon. But shouldn't we be investing in that type of defense?
Yes, I believe it's a bipartisan issue to improve our biosecurity preparedness, and that is prevention of both accidental, deliberate, and natural threats.
You said something else, you had something else in your written testimony that raised some concerns for me. You said frontier AI companies can voluntarily report their safety evaluations to the U.S. Center for AI Standards and Innovation. I mean, it's illegal to conduct operate a biological lab. It surprised me to think that there's no law, no mandate to require people to report their safety evaluations.
That's correct. A legislative proposal would be needed in order to ensure that. Currently, reporting is voluntary to the U.S. CASE, and they set standards, but no requirements.
But this should not just be a U.S. issue, shouldn't it be an international issue?
I agree.
Do you know of any cases where something bad happened or there was a safety evaluation that determined a bad outcome that was not reported?
I think what I am more concerned about are models and companies that do not conduct any evaluations, where we really lack clarity as to the capabilities of those models. So I'd like to see more investment internationally in government capabilities for evaluations and safety testing.
Dr. Diggans, you made a statement about a researcher that somehow wound up carrying a smallpox sample to his home. And Mr. McKnight, you made a comment about biological agents could be produced in your garage, both of which is illegal. Is that something that we need to address? I mean, you can't operate a lab outside a secure location, and that is an international law. So do you know of instances where people are using artificial intelligence to produce proteins that could be a problem? Or any protein, for that matter. Either one of you, both of you can respond.
Thank you for the question. The smallpox issue occurred in 2006, before the industry had really thought through a lot of these security-related concerns. That wouldn't happen today.
Okay.
But you're correct that there are very few regulations that control the physical possession of individual sequences, proteins, not whole genomes, not whole organisms, but individual sequences.
Okay.
And so the government
And
put in more
very
thought
quickly,
into this.
because I have one last thing I want to ask Dr. Pannu. Go ahead.
I just addressed the larger question of bioweapons. The reality is, every time we have taken a base science and turned it into an engineerable discipline, chemistry, physics, computing, those have been used in human conflict. It would be the anomaly in human history at the frontier of engineered biology that over 50 years, some actor, nation state, or individual or group doesn't try to do it.
Well, I'll just say this for all three of you. I was going to address it to Dr. Pannu because she mentioned it in her written testimony. We need recommendations for what this subcommittee, what this committee needs to do to bring before Congress. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Mr. Mullen for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today to discuss this critically important topic. I am proud that companies in my California district are demonstrating leadership in this space, including Twist Bioscience, represented here today by Dr. Diggans. Dr. Diggans, thank you for being here. So AI is already beginning to change how biotechnology research is done. Capabilities that once required large labs and highly controlled environments are increasingly accessible through shared models, platforms, and cloud-based tools. Two of the most innovative sectors in the U.S. today are AI and biotech. They can anticipate, lead, and respond to changes across the market in ways that government cannot. However, there certainly may be a role for Congress to play in setting better national biosecurity standards so that companies are working on an equal playing field and we are prioritizing the health and safety of Americans from future threats. So, Dr. Diggans, in your testimony, I was watching from my office, you discussed some of the steps that your company, Twist Bioscience, and other responsible DNA synthesis companies take to manage risk and prevent malicious actors from acquiring potentially harmful sequences. Twist screening practices are in part tied to the Federal Select Agent List. Is that correct? What I'm concerned about is what happens when being on the list doesn't tell us much. If harmful biological functions can eventually be designed without resembling known pathogens, how should policymakers think about screening standards in a world where function matters more than the sequence itself?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I think this is really a key sort of paradigm shift that I would hope that Congress will think through, is the move from enumerating lists of well-known, well-characterized viruses and bacterial pathogens that occur in nature to generalized concepts of, if I have a biological system that I want to defend, what kinds of harm am I trying to defend against? And then once you've enumerated those, then you can start enumerating defenses against and capabilities for detecting that harm.
So if you could just amplify, what are some of the steps you think Congress could take to ensure responsible companies in this space are not at a disadvantage to those that don't conduct rigorous screening of clients and requested sequences?
The industry has worked quite hard over the past 10 years to make screening systems more lower cost and widely available. So we think that it's reasonable now to mandate screening within the United States and also to restrict federal funds spent on synthetic DNA, even with international providers, only to companies that have these processes in place as verified by third parties, which is not currently something that's widely available.
So thank you for that. As these tools become more capable and more widely available, we need to ensure that they're being used for beneficial research to find new cures to diseases and to save lives, and not to make it easier for bad actors to re-engineer viruses or build bioweapons. So, Dr. Pannu, this committee has spent a lot of time discussing guardrails for AI models. Could you describe the current ecosystem for AI models used in biotechnology, specifically who is building these models and who has access to them?
Thank you for the question. Largely for models that are used for life sciences research, those are being developed by US academics and other leading academics globally, as well as nonprofit and industry research organizations. In terms of guardrails, the guardrail ecosystem for large language models and agents is more mature. It's a couple of years ahead of biological AI models. The safeguards for the biology models are more nascent, and investment is needed there to develop safeguards.
Great, thank you for that. And can you just briefly speak to the role that KC and NIST can play in establishing safeguards for biological AI models? Do they currently have the authorities, tools they need to effectively serve that role, or are there gaps that we should all be aware of?
Thank you for the question. I think that Casey is doing incredibly important work in terms of working with frontier AI companies, having those voluntary agreements where they can guide companies with regards to safeguards development. Casey needs to be enabled to be able to do that on the biology model side. They need to be empowered by Congress to do so in terms of being given the authority, for example, to define the set of biological AI models that do pose harms, and that clarity would also help industry in terms of knowing where they can focus their efforts, where they need to attend to safeguards.
Excellent, thank you for that. Thank you all for being here. With that, I yield back my time.
Thank you. Up next is the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you. I think a lot of the good questions have been asked, so this might feel repetitive. Dr. Diggans, when a lab rejects a dangerous order, is that information shared with anyone? Any federal requirements that would compel you to share that with anyone at all? Or is it just voluntary?
Thank you for the question. Right now, that information, there are two possible routes for sharing. One is through the International Gene Synthesis Consortium, which is an industry consortium of synthesis companies. and the second would be directly with law enforcement. There is no requirement for when that information is shared if an order is denied, and so it's up to company discretion.
But there's at least a place to share it, is what you're telling me?
There are certainly two fora available to share that information, yes.
Which part of law enforcement?
The FBI.
FBI, okay, so FBI is a compository, so they track it, but there's no, would you think it's useful for us to consider legislation that would compel sharing of that?
I think it's useful if we were able to set standards around when that threshold would be reached. The problem is that a lot of this information is highly specific from order to order and can differ in the kinds of threat assessments you might think would lie behind the order.
Is there, I mean, does the association you mentioned earlier, is it established, again, they're the experts on what might seem threatening or suspicious? Is there something that you can give us that would help us understand how to take a scalpel to that problem correctly?
I think your question is a really important one, and we've been working with NIST to try and develop standards around customer screening that would try and call out exactly as you would suggest, what would red flags be that should trigger these kinds of reporting.
Right, because I mean, you've argued your company's at a disadvantage if you're doing it voluntarily, while others just sell to whoever, right? It does require an extra administrative burden on the good actors.
That's right. Yeah, right now there's a pretty strong economic incentive not to screen because it's just a cost. And so federal mandates for those practices would be important to making them uniformly adopted.
Okay. For Mr. McKnight, we talked a lot about how AI can be used for all sorts of scary things. What about the good parts? What about assisting industry leaders and researchers in identifying biosecurity risks? In other words, again, how can we use AI for good?
Thank you for the question. This builds on the conversation we were having about select agent lists and then the new incredible diversity of threats. The same way the biodesign tools that we're talking about can create new proteins and give kind of lessons on how to create new medicines, those same tools can be turned around, and is why we need to be on the cutting edge of those tools and take a DNA sequence, which is why Biothreat Radar really needs to be built on sequencing, because you get the whole amount of data that you need to look at. It's not just one thing you're testing for. They can be turned around to automate the process of interpreting a sample that you're looking at. And then the development roadmap that is funded through these programs is to use AI to go from sequence detection to what the function is, like Dr. Diggans is talking about. And some of the best cutting edge work on the AI for good, and is why we have to stay at the cutting edge of these biodesign tools, is because when you flip them around and use them for detection and characterization of threats, you can get ahead of this kind of ever perpetual build something new, can you figure out what it is, build something new, can you figure out what it is?
So, and going back to Mr. Diggans, just digging in a little bit more on the screening process, you receive orders domestically and internationally. Is there a difference in how you screen those?
No, they all go through the same screening process. There's a difference in how we interpret the outcome. So some orders might be subject to U.S. export controls.
Okay. Okay, so there are some, if it's an international order, there are some, because of, like you said, U.S. export controls, there are at least some restrictions in place.
That's right.
Under federal law. I'll follow up. And for Dr. Pannu, in my last 30 seconds, I'm trying to play a cleanup on all the questions that haven't been asked. Are clinical researchers trained in responsible lab conduct related to AI biorisks? Do we have like a curriculum for that?
Thank you for the question. There isn't currently curriculum for that, but I do believe there's interest, so that would be important to advance.
Okay, very interesting. Yield back, thank you.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Clark, and I want to thank our witnesses for offering all of their expertise today. Now, this is the 7th hearing we've had this year on the threats of AI, yet our Congress has passed 0 pieces of legislation to address the many, many legitimate concerns that have been raised regarding this issue. And in fact, the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress this year are actually pushing the opposite. Instead of legislation regarding artificial intelligence, they have been trying multiple times to pass legislation that would actually end any regulation or rulemaking, particularly on the state level, to limit any oversight of AI at all. And because Republicans couldn't pass their 10-year ban on state AI regulations, Trump then went around and skirted Congress with his own executive order trying to ban states from imposing any AI regulations at all, not just on biological activity, but through children's safety, through all sorts of different measures. And in fact, this is happening as AI chatbots are causing children to take their own lives, as AI data centers are skyrocketing electricity costs and polluting local communities, and as an overwhelming majority of Americans now worry that AI will take their jobs and leave them permanently unemployed. Dr. Havers, as a public health expert, is it safe to say that there are public health consequences of failing to regulate AI?
Absolutely. I mean, we've heard from these three witnesses of the threat that failing to regulate AI has for generating novel emerging pathogenic threats that could cause the next pandemic. I mean, I think in addition, there are a lot of concerns in the public health community about patient data privacy. I also think that AI can be used to spread misinformation about treatments and vaccines, for example. And I think failing to regulate AI, if it's not done at the federal level, I think states probably do need to be empowered to protect their own patient, like people living in their jurisdiction's privacy, and help prevent them from, the downstream effects.
And so we have, as an expert witness testified today, you have stating and are stating, as well as several others, that there are real public health consequences for the continued failure of regulating or there being congressional action in the AI space. And so it begs the question, why is the federal government trying to prevent any state regulation of AI and protecting the American people? And I think it's pretty plain to say that it's because this is a story of corruption. AI giants like Google, Meta, and Microsoft have poured millions of dollars into Donald Trump's privately funded White House ballroom. Tech CEOs have been on Capitol Hill in recent weeks to talk with Speaker Johnson, who is conveniently getting a nearly $30 billion Meta data center built in his state. And lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have disclosed stock purchases of top AI companies. In fact, 4 U.S. senators have purchased stocks while they were negotiating a massive deregulation of this industry. And on top of that, AI industry executives and investors are working to raise $100 million to influence the upcoming midterm elections. And the reason that these AI tech giants are lobbying for a state-level ban, for a ban on state-level regulations, is because they know that they don't want to fight these regulations in all 50 states. It's far more expensive to lobby 50 states' state houses than it is to try to centralize your operations and lobby in Congress and the President of the United States and the White House. So that's what's going on here. And it is very important that the American people understand that President Trump's executive order to try to prevent any of this action, to protect people, is endangering their lives, it is endangering public health, and it is endangering the integrity of our public institutions. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Dr. Dunn, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I actually have some firsthand knowledge of defensive biological warfare. When I was in the Army, I was stationed at Fort Detrick, home to the headquarters for USAMRIID. I worked on infectious diseases, sepsis, and developing defenses against pathogens. As soon as I was appointed to the House Select Committee on Chinese Communist Party, I began working on the Biosecure Act. The Biosecure Act aims to restrict U.S. federal agencies from working with biotechnology firms deemed to be a risk to national security, primarily those linked to the Chinese Communist Party, and protecting U.S. from inadvertently crippling our own biotech industry. As you know, the Chinese Communist Party is already advancing biotechnology in ways previously known only in fiction and movies. But for everyone who's joining us today, let me be clear, this threat is very real. It's made up of our worst nightmares. No longer is a genetically modified army or bioweapon capable of targeting specific populations some sort of far-off imaginary threat. It's here today. It's being developed at an alarmingly fast rate by our most advanced adversary. I have no problem stating that the Chinese Communist Party is morally depraved and actively committing abject crimes against humanity. Case in point, in June, the FBI arrested 2 nationals from China for conspiracy to smuggle an agro-terrorism weapon into the United States. And events like this raise concerning questions about how vulnerable the United States is to biological attack. If we lose our edge in this critical subject, the framework and guardrails will be written by somebody else, not us. Mr. McKnight, let me start by saying I look forward to working with this group of experts outside this hearing as well as inside this hearing, because we do need to advance not only Biosecure but PAPA. But Mr. McKnight, can you tell us what new capabilities AI will give China in advancing its own biomedical research, and how grim does the world look in the event China beats us in biosecurity and AI sectors?
Well, thank you for your question, and I look forward to working with you outside of this hearing as well. I share the significant concerns that you raise over adversary nations, in particular the Chinese Communist Party. I think just at a start point, we should really truly remember biology is power, but really biology, like other technical domains before it, is geopolitical power, and nation states realize that. And we would be remiss to forget that's the context here. Our adversaries certainly do not. China has made it very clear in their own public documentation that they see the biological domain as the strategic commanding heights of power. That's direct from their literature. The Select Committee identified that, and I think it's very important we recognize the stakes of the game that they are playing. As it relates to the specific capabilities, I think this is why we need to recognize that we cannot only regulate and focus on our own industry, because there are things we do not control. And the bigger picture is how do we build a holistic defense strategy and a biosecurity strategy on a global scale for what we can predict will come in the next 1, 5, 10, and 50 years over the course of this biological engineering revolution.
There's a lot of threats out there. Dr. Pannu, smallpox was declared eradicated decades ago, but advances in technology and biology are elevating the risk of bioterror threat again. Tools that accelerate gene design modeling and synthesis are widely available, and national security experts have warned us that they may recreate these bioweapons from yesteryear. I'm concerned that smallpox could easily be recreated by our enemies. From your perspective, how credible is the threat, and is the federal government prepared to address that threat?
Thank you for the question. I think the reemergence of smallpox would be a catastrophe, and it should be something that we work to prevent. I think threats like that are a national security issue, and there is a congressionally mandated office called the Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response that Congress could consider further resourcing and making sure that that office has a seat on the National Security Council, given the severity of the threats that you described.
Thanks so very much. You know, my time's about expired, but I want to say I can use your help with the Biosecure Act and with the PAPA, Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness, which has to be renewed. And so I thank you for your help in advance. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Ms. Barragan for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hear my Republican colleague express concern if China beats us in biosecurity, Dr. Havers, is healthcare a biosecurity issue?
Absolutely. I mean, if there was another pandemic, as we saw when the COVID-19 pandemic started in 2020, hospitals were rapidly overwhelmed. We were setting up field hospitals in Central Park. I personally experienced in the Atlanta VA overwhelmed ICUs, lack of PPE. Our healthcare system is strained to the breaking point. We have healthcare worker shortages across the country. I think hospitals are closing. Every year during respiratory virus season, when we see spikes in hospitalizations of influenza, COVID, and RSV, hospitals get full. You add another pathogen on top of that, we will not be able to handle it. And I think that also people not being able to access healthcare on a regular basis because we lack universal healthcare, I think puts us at greater risk for more mortality, more deaths than are necessary if a novel pathogen were to emerge and cause another pandemic.
Well, thank you, doctor, and that's what's so befuddling about the hearing today. It's that I serve on the healthcare subcommittee. I have waved on to this hearing because we haven't had a hearing since September. And the concern of China beating us on biosecurity is a real one, but that includes making sure Americans have access to healthcare. It's making sure that the Congress, including Republicans who are so deathly afraid of this president, stand up and speak out on the dismantling of the infrastructure of our healthcare system. Just today, Republicans are pushing a healthcare plan on the floor that lets the Affordable Care Act tax credits expire, which means millions of Americans will not have access to health insurance. I think this directly weakens our ability to stop the spread of disease. Now, we had 4 courageous Republicans join Democrats in saying Americans should have insurance and we should extend these tax credits. And so I want to continue to call on the Speaker to bring the bill up immediately for a vote. Dr. Havers, I want to talk a little bit more about health coverage. When people can afford health insurance, they're more likely to seek preventive care. They're more likely to get vaccinated and see the doctor when they feel sick. If Republicans fail to extend the Affordable Care Act tax premium credits, 20 million Americans will see their premiums double and over 4 million will lose their coverage entirely because the costs are too high. If people cannot afford care and they delay treatment, how does that affect the spread of a virus?
What we will see is we'll see people presenting much sicker than they would have otherwise been. I think if people delay care, don't have access to preventive care, access to life-saving vaccines like the influenza and the COVID-19 vaccines, people will be less vaccinated. So we will see thousands more people potentially ending up in the hospital when they could potentially have had a mild illness and stayed at home. I think that's just sort of dealing with current viruses. But I think in general, if people don't have access to preventive care, when they are infected with a novel pathogen, for example, they are far more likely to have bad outcomes. The people that are continuing to die of COVID-19 now are people with underlying medical conditions, generally, and it has the greatest impact on older adults, very young children, and those with underlying medical conditions. The sicker you are, if you aren't able to access regular health care, the more vulnerable you are to a pandemic threat. This pandemic was far worse than the 2009 pandemic that we had with H1N1 because there was no population-level immunity among older adults who are the ones that are most vulnerable to severe outcomes. And this is why we saw more than 1 million Americans die from COVID-19. I think having a robust healthcare system where all people have access to treating underlying medical conditions that will, mitigate or make them less likely to have severe outcomes if there was a novel pathogen, I think is very important. But just even deploying vaccines, if they become available, is really challenging to do if you have no primary healthcare provider, if you have a weakened healthcare infrastructure, and if people aren't able to get treatment in the setting of a pandemic because hospitals are overwhelmed and we don't have enough nurses, doctors, and other hospital staff to provide care.
And then quickly, are you concerned at all about the current assault on assaults, the assault on vaccines, making them less affordable?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a lot of ways that could play out. I do think that one of the things that this committee, the ACIP committee, if they do not recommend a vaccine, and they change it and they don't say it's shared clinical decision-making, then it doesn't necessarily have to be covered by
Time has
insurance.
expired.
Great.
The chair now
Thank you. I yield back.
recognizes the gentlelady from Washington, Dr. Schreier, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. We're here to discuss the biosecurity risks of the intersection of AI and biology. And while the potential for a bad actor to use AI to design a virus that is as miserable as Ebola and as contagious as measles is terrifying, the most serious biosecurity threats facing the U.S. right now are not theoretical. Measles is already here, it is already killing children, and it does not require AI to spread quickly. All it requires is some gaps in vaccination and a plane flight or a trip to the grocery store. It is one of the most contagious diseases out there. It is entirely vaccine preventable, and no child should have to suffer or die from it. Dr. Havers, what does the ongoing measles outbreak tell us about the consequences when vaccination uptake drops, particularly for children or people who are immunocompromised?
No, that's a great question. I mean, the fact that measles we've had continuous outbreaks of measles for the last 11 months, indicates how important herd immunity is. Certain vaccines are extremely effective that if everyone in the population is vaccinated, the disease will not be able to spread widely through the community. This is maintaining herd immunity for diseases such as measles, where we have an effective vaccine. It protects not only infants too young to be vaccinated, people are immunocompromised and the vaccines don't work, but it protects the entire community. When we've had decades of misinformation and false information about the safety and efficacy of vaccines, and what we're seeing is we're losing herd immunity in settings for pathogens like measles, where herd immunity is critical to stop
Because of misinformation spread for decades by RFK Jr. and others like him, sowing doubt. I'm wondering, just as you think about the landscape, and I've asked this to some of your former colleagues, what are some of the other vaccine-preventable diseases that you are worried might reemerge if this trend of sowing misinformation and scaring parents and dropping vaccination rates continues?
I mean, it's possible we'll see the return of polio, for example, but I think what we're already seeing are diseases like Haemophilus influenza B and pneumococcal meningitis, which, as any pediatrician that trained in the 80s, they got very good at doing spinal taps on babies because this is a frequent presentation of devastating invasive bacterial infections. Effective vaccines have basically eliminated those in children in America. But I think young pediatricians now are going to have to get a lot better at doing spinal taps because they are seeing a huge number of unvaccinated children, so they can't rule that out. So even if they don't have that disease, they get more testing.
That's
but
right.
also we're going to see an increase in pediatric deaths because of those diseases.
And I trained in the 90s and still did a lot of spinal taps. And I just want to just connect some dots between a link there. When kids get these bacterial illnesses, Hib, pneumococcus, then they need antibiotics. And we already have a problem in this country with antibiotic resistance. And I just want to point out that there are more consequences. You know, one is babies dying of these things, but the other is that antibiotics that we use to treat them may not work. We just came through a once-in-a-century pandemic, and you would think that that would have brought our country together, made us more interested in preparedness and more excited about mRNA vaccines. HHS, under the guidance of RFK Jr., just cut almost $600 million from mRNA research. We just had the first case in the country of H5N5 flu, and the patient died of it. And this is exactly why we need mRNA vaccines, which brought us that COVID vaccine in record time. I think the fastest before that was 4 years, and we got it in a year, in less than a year. What are the implications of this? Should, for example, H5N5 or even H5N1 start moving like person-to-person transmission?
Well, we know that, I mean, H5N5, the case that you mentioned, was the first time that virus had ever been detected in a human in the world, not just in the United States. And so that's just a new virus that we have in the last month or two. But H5N1 is a well-known pandemic threat, and it is mutating fast. We have the ability to create a stockpile of H5N1 vaccines should this blow up. That would mean that frontline healthcare workers would have immediate access to life-saving vaccines, so they would not be putting their lives at the same level of risk that they are taking care of patients when if this blows up and efficient human-to-human trends happens and we have a pandemic. But yanking the funding from that and from mRNA vaccines, again, takes away one of the strongest tools we have for responding quickly and rolling out a vaccine as quickly as possible. Days and weeks matter at the beginning of a pandemic.
Thank you. And I just want the country to remember the early days of COVID when you were describing what you did and doctors taking care of patients and nurses were dying because of that exposure. We need the vaccines. We need the mRNA research. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McKnight, I'm going to come to you. In your written testimony, you note that the U.S. has a critical need to implement systems that allow the U.S. to monitor and respond to biological threats to our way of life. When implementing biological intelligence capabilities and a deployable biothreat radar, how do we ensure that those systems are not compromised by adversarial nations? So are they going to have enough technology to get into those, bring them down potentially? Thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that this is a really important question, and thank you for asking. There are 3 layers to how to think about it. First and foremost, the reason to build our own sovereign capabilities versus relying on only on cooperation, which we should do to get data from others, is that we can control the end-to-end systems, the chain of custody of data, just like we do in other domains with Five Eyes or with NATO or with our allies. So part of owning your own detection capabilities is being able to secure it. I think the second piece of that is collecting enough data that you know and understand when there are anomalies. Today, even our current systems are much more easily corrupted in the sense that we don't have a lot of baseline data to understand where changes are. This is a lesson that we've learned from cybersecurity over and over again. And I think the last piece of this question around how do we make sure that these systems are secure is truly treating it. When we were early on developing the concept of biological intelligence, BioInt, it was a set of former advisors from the national security community in different places that said, this is like the technical collection discipline for bio, like we have signals intelligence or measurement and signals intelligence or imagery intelligence, and then so you treat it with the same care that you do other collection domains. And when you do those things, we've built many, many years of infrastructure to secure the data and collection.
Yeah, and that's the business you're in, and I know you're good at it. But I'm thinking in addition, given the number of scientific experts working in U.S. universities and laboratories from countries outside the U.S., how do we safeguard this research from bad actors? What are the clues? What are the notes? What do you have put in place so that you can track those very people that may be here with not good intentions?
Yeah, so certainly that piece of it is not mine, but I spent a number of years as a Marine Corps intelligence officer. I think 2 things. An inability to analyze a problem is worse when there's gray area. So the more information we have, in this case biological intelligence, is additive to the second piece, which is we absolutely need an effort, which starts with what Dr. Pannu was talking about, training of good scientists who are sitting next to people who might be doing things that are not correct, all the way through to integrating with other sources of law enforcement and intelligence to make sure that we are staying ahead of people who might seek to do ill. We have to do that domestically, but the bigger issue, the big missing gap, is that we recognize, because biology doesn't have borders, that this activity is going to take place outside of our country, and we need I would say, 100x plus increased investment in time and attention, and certainly, yes, resources to ensure we are looking outside our borders for threats as they develop.
So have you, given the concern that AI-enabled bio-threats could diminish our system or render medical countermeasures absolutely obsolete, because I don't know, this stuff, as you know, goes so quickly, things just keep going faster and faster. Early detection is what's needed, it's essential, and we have to have it to stay safe. Have you seen, I know you were in Marine, how long were you in the Marines?
5 years active duty, but 17 in the reserves.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Have you seen the Trump administration actually engaged to be able to prevent an AI-enabled biothreat from ever occurring, or is that a possibility? Is there a way to prevent it from ever occurring, and what's the Trump administration doing?
My general position on biothreats of the future is that it is much more like cyber. They will occur. And so we need to be able to do what you are saying, rapid detection all the way through to rapid countermeasure development. The Trump administration, building on previous efforts and frameworks, has launched this concept of biothreat radar and has asked for funding for HHS CDC to reallocate towards expanding detection programs. The State Department is also doing the same thing under the moniker of biothreat radar.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Mr. Auchincloss for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to weigh on this important discussion. The United States and peoples around the world indeed face emerging biothreats, and appreciate the testimony of the witnesses here, particularly Mr. McKnight, who I'm proud to say is a constituent, and Massachusetts is certainly proud to have Ginkgo Bioworks founded and operating out of our state. And I served on the Select Committee on China last term. I've got significant concerns about biology as the sixth domain of human conflict and the Chinese Communist Party's willingness to weaponize that domain. I tend to agree with Mr. McKnight that any domain that can be weaponized in the field of human conflict ultimately will be. Yet, regrettably, I believe the biggest threat to global health right now is not coming from the Chinese Communist Party. It is the reality that the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services does not believe in the germ theory of disease. He has repeatedly, over the course of his career, said that the germ theory of disease, which might be the single best supported scientific theory of biology of the last 200 years, is spurious. He favors what's called terrain theory, which is the concept that your body gets sick because of an imbalance of humors within your body, and microbes take root in your tissues to clean out the bad stuff. We are trying to prepare for a future in 2050 of pathogens, both accidental, natural, intentional, with leadership that believes in a theory that would have been out of date in the 1850s, before the United States Civil War. It is an embarrassment to the American public. Dr. Havers, you had to work in an environment created by this kind of quackery and conspiracy. Could you speak about the culture it creates amongst scientific experts at CDC, at NIH, at FDA, when the leadership of HHS rejects foundational science?
I mean, it makes it impossible to work, and I think that that's why we've seen such a loss of expertise at all these federal agencies, either voluntary, in large part voluntary, because they could not tolerate being under a leadership that regularly espouses unscientific nonsense, frankly. And I think that as these are nonpartisan agencies. Like CDC historically has only had one political appointee, and people have worked under multiple administrations without interference. See, people in these agencies care about science and care about data, but it is incredibly demoralizing when you see the agency that you've dedicated your career to weaponized to spread unscientific and dangerous theories.
Can we prepare for future pathogens using a terrain theory of disease?
Absolutely not. No, of course not. I mean, we need to have people that actually know what the science is and understand basic science and leadership.
Also had to work under Mr. Brad Smith, is that correct?
Yes, I mean, I didn't directly interact with him.
But you were working there when he was running Doge Healthcare.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Smith now has gone from running Doge Healthcare to the State Department to run global health. When he was at Doge for the US Health and Human Services, and I want to build on the theme from the gentlelady from New York here of corruption, Mr. Smith had a private firm, Main Street Health, whose biggest investors were the biggest health insurance corporations in America, all the biggest customers and providers of health insurance under Medicare Advantage. He then was put in charge of Medicare through DOGE and proceeded to increase reimbursements for his own investors and cut the regulations of these Medicare Advantage organizations. Rewarded for that behavior, he is now running U.S. Global Health at the State Department. Do you think our allies and people overseas can have confidence that Mr. Smith is going to execute in the interests of global health or in the interests of his investors?
I don't know, I don't have personal knowledge of Mr. Smith's dealings, but I will say that the scientific credibility of the U.S. abroad has been incredibly damaged. People are looking with horror on what has been done at NIH, FDA, CDC. I do think that we do not have the leadership in place that has the integrity and the best interests of the American people at heart at the moment.
Do you think it would help our credibility if Congress would do oversight of RFK, of Mr. Smith, and of the other chieftains of U.S. healthcare right now?
I think so. I mean, I think it's very much needed. I mean, for example, Secretary Kennedy has basically run roughshod.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back. Thank you, Dr. Havers.
Seeing that there are no further members wishing to ask questions, I would like to thank our witnesses. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the delay because of votes that occurred today and for being with us here today. We are at a critical intersection, and your expertise will help form policy as we move forward. We know these issues need to be addressed, and this committee is willing to do that. Pursuant to committee rules, I would remind members that they have 10 business days to submit the additional questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to submit their responses within 10 business days upon receipt of the questions. Members should submit their questions by the close of business on Tuesday, January 6th. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.